Good to see everybody joining the call. So to be respectful of for everybody's time, I'm going to get started introducing our speaker today, which most of you know. David Bailin was the founder of Personal Wealth Strategies in 1996. And the goal was to help successful individuals and their families accumulate and preserve wealth. The focus of the financial practice has been providing advice to clients and assisting them in making smart decisions about their money. And here at Personal Wealth Strategies, we're students of the financial research, and therefore our investment strategies are grounded in Nobel Prize winning principles of modern portfolio theory. David is a graduate of Lehigh University, and during his career, he's earned many designations, which you see there on the screen: the accredited investment fiduciary, the chartered financial consultant, chartered life underwriter, and then also certification in long-term care. And over the years, David has spoken numerous times to many different organizations. And this topic is really very important, especially today, because most people statistically will need to deal with this, either for their parents, for themselves, for a spouse, for a brother, sister. Just the statistics of people living longer, this will be a topic. And we're really focusing in on getting a plan around long-term care, not specifically on insurance, which a lot of people focus in on. If you were hoping to talk about insurance, that's not going to be the topic for today. It's really going to be developing a plan around what you will do when you face an extended care expense leading up to that. And there will be a Q&A feature that you see at the bottom of your screen. So if a question pops up, feel free to type it in the Q&A and we will be able to address that along the webinar. So without any further ado, I present to you David Bailin. David Bailin, protecting your most important asset, your family.
Thank you, Justin. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of having a well-designed plan for addressing the expenses associated with long-term care. Now, for inevitably, we each will have to deal with this, as Justin mentioned a moment ago, at some time in our lives. Aging takes its toll on our ability to remain totally independent. And no matter how you define family in your household, you're going to find that at some point, you're going to be in the role of a caregiver, caring for a caregiver, or being cared for by a caregiver. So this topic is really near and dear to everybody. My goal today is to give you insight into the consequences that needing care over a period of years will have on those you love. We're going to speak to those consequences that an extended care event will have on even your best thought out retirement plan. And we're just going to discuss options for protecting both your family and the finances should you need care. Now, one of the things that's unusual about this topic is, unlike other areas of risk that can unexpectedly derail an otherwise sound financial plan, such as an early death or sudden disability, a long-term care event is actually more likely to occur than not to occur. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, 70% of adults who survive to age 65 will develop the need for long-term care service. 48% of those people are going to receive paid care during their lifetime. Living a long life could be in your future. Planning for it now is a necessity. For as Benjamin Franklin taught us, those that fail to plan to fail. Now, I believe that reasonable people understand that they could live a long life, understand it's possible they could become frail and need care as they age. They're willing to consider acting if they understand that needing care could have a serious consequence to their family and their retirement portfolio. That being said, I've heard people say, what if I don't live a long life? Very few people in my family live past their 70s. Or even if I do live a long life, what if I don't need care? Perhaps everyone in my family has been healthy till the day that they died. When I hear those types of expressions, I've responded that, well, you might very well be right. The risk of dying at an early age may be high, and the risk of needing care may be low because of your family history. But today, what I want to focus in on are the consequences to those that you love if you ever did live a long life and needed care. You see, true financial planning does not focus on the probability of an event. Rather, the focus is on the consequences should it occur. To give you an example, most of us wouldn't think of living in a house that didn't have homeowners insurance because, God forbid, there was a fire and it burnt to the ground. We couldn't afford to rebuild that house. So we focus on the consequence of the house burning down rather than the probability that that house might burn down. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to happen to you, but let's talk about what causes the need for extended care. So an extended care event could be caused by a physical impairment, which is defined as a chronic medical condition that can be managed by medication or therapy, but can't be cured by either. These illnesses compromise your ability to get through the activities of daily living. Now, you could also be faced with a cognitive impairment, which is a measurable decline in your intellect, making it difficult, if not impossible, for you to safely interact with your environment. Both of these conditions require custodial care, not medical care. And there's two sets of consequences that your family will face. The first is the risk to the emotional and physical well-being of those you love because of the nature of the extended care. Now, we've seen in our practice where extended care has become a safety issue, which means that providing care or supervising movement can quickly become all-consuming. This 24-hour-a-day responsibility has a direct impact on the caregiver's emotional and physical well-being, which inevitably forces a child to step in, causing him or her to reorient their life. Providing care to chronically ill people makes healthy caregivers chronically ill. Let me repeat that. Providing care to a chronically ill people makes the healthcare giver chronically ill in many cases. And it usually forces a child to put aside his or her life. After all, what choice would they face? Providing care does not bring children together. It tears them apart. Simply put, if you ever need care over a period of years, your life is not going to end, but somebody else's will. Now, here's the thought. Did you notice there was no mention about nursing home care? That's because the real damage to family begins not when placement is made, but when the decision is made to keep the person they love at home. Now, do you know why families struggle, often against all odds, to keep people at home? Because making a placement breaks your heart. Now, the second set of consequences is to your ability to keep financial commitments. Paying for care requires reallocation of the income. This has an immediate impact on your ability to keep financial promises. If the illness lasts long enough, it invariably leads to an invasion of principal in your investment portfolio. This could have a direct impact on your ability to secure the financial viability of a surviving spouse and children who may depend on an inheritance. Now, have I told any of you that you will need care? Have I quoted any statistics telling you the extended care is in your future? But do you begin to see how serious the consequences to those you love would be if care was ever needed? My point is, most topics, most seminars always talk about the statistics and fail to reflect on the human cost of long-term care. So we're going to talk to you today about how a plan can protect those you love. Because only by planning in advance can you avoid leaving your care and all the issues around it to chance. Now, a good long-term care plan has two objectives. The first is to allow you to remain in the community without risking the emotional and physical well-being of those who will provide your care. The second is to preserve your retirement plan so it can execute for the purpose that you intended, which generally includes supporting your financial obligations, minimizing taxes, and ensuring the financial viability of your surviving spouse. Now let's look at a case study. Alan and Camille are 43 years old. They have 2 children. Their combined income is $150,000 a year. Their home is worth $500,000 and has a mortgage of $300,000. Their retirement portfolio is just under $250,000. They have 1 child in private school and 1 in college. Now, Alan suddenly dies of a heart attack. How much of his retirement portfolio or equity in the house will be used to pay for the continuing obligations that Camille will face? Well, in most cases, none. Because Alan purchased a life insurance policy, although he didn't think he was going to die during his working years. In fact, statistically, at 43, he was correct. But Alan knew that even though the risk of death might be low, the consequences would be catastrophic to his family. Alan purchased life insurance for the same reason everyone purchased life insurance. That is, he loved his family. Now let's change it up a bit and suppose Alan survives his heart attack and he and Camille make it to age 78. Alan's passion is now golf. Camille rides horses. Both love to travel, and they've purchased a condo in Florida where they spend their winters. By now, their primary house is paid off and worth $600,000, while the Florida condo is worth $300,000. The retirement portfolio is worth $800,000. They have $500,000 in their IRAs, $250,000 in an investment account, and $50,000 in a local bank. Their income consists of $40,000 in Social Security checks, and they also draw $50,000 from their IRAs. They have a child who has not made the best decisions, and they're helping to pay for their grandchildren's education. Camille is now diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. How much has been allocated from Alan and Camille's retirement portfolio and their income to pay for her care over the next 8 to 10 years? All of it. Because by allocating nothing to pay for extended care, the family has just allocated everything to pay for extended care. If you have no plan, that is your plan. Now Alan is faced with how to pay for his wife's custodial care. So he begins to do some research. He looks into Medicare, but finds that Medicare won't pay for custodial care. He looks at the VA, but again, he's told it's not an option given his assets and income. Finally, he looks into Medicaid, and this time he learns that it will pay for custodial care, but almost exclusively in a nursing home. And to qualify for benefits, he's going to have to give away most of his assets. Alan also finds out that once Camille qualifies for Medicaid, he will lose her entire pension, which he needs to cover his own living expenses. In effect, he finds out that Medicaid is not free and promises that it will be his last resort. Now, lacking other resources, Alan decides to provide the care himself to preserve his income and assets. Alan's health begins to fail to the point where his daughter has no choice but to step in and assist. Now, with his daughter's assisting, what is that going to do to her health and the relationship with her brother, who is not helping out? You see, Camille has Alzheimer's, but her husband and children were the ones who suffered from it. Many people believe a long-term care plan protects them if they need care, but it doesn't. It protects your family. It provides a stream of income that is used to pay others to provide the care. This allows your spouse to supervise others rather than to provide it by him or herself. It's a second gift of life to your children because it keeps the children together by keeping them apart. Many people believe that a long-term care plan protects your assets from being spent on care. Doesn't do that either. But what it does do is by providing a stream of income to pay for your care, your primary source of income generated by Social Security, pension, and retirement portfolio does not have to be reallocated, which means your ability to support your lifestyle, which includes commitments to your family and community, is assured, which means you never have to deplete your portfolio. Why is it so important that your plan provide an external source of funds? Because liquidating assets creates a tax liability. At the time that you need those assets, what happens if the investment markets are down when you need to sell? And how much of your portfolio can be easily converted to cash? Certainly not that condo in Florida. What happens to your future liabilities if you liquidate your assets now? Perhaps you're thinking, if I need care, you won't have much of a lifestyle anyway, so the money saved can be used to pay for your care. Well, it stopped being your lifestyle the day you got married and had kids. Think about it. Which one of these expenses are truly discretionary? Your family's vacation home? Money that you spend on your grandchildren? Money provided to your own children, including perhaps a child with special needs? Club memberships? Most of us wouldn't be willing to give up any of these things. Now, when we look to create a long-term care plan, we need to answer a couple questions to begin. First, how important is it to you to remain in your home? What modifications are necessary to your house in order to support your living there? What changes in lifestyle will be required for you and your family if you remain in the home? Now, let's talk about the various tools used to create a long-term care plan. Oftentimes, people immediately jump to the conclusion that they should purchase traditional long-term care insurance. But believe it or not, today we rarely see that as a sole solution. Let's look at some of the tools used in creating a plan to cover the cost of extended care. Well, some people have sufficient assets to self-insure. Now, self-insurance is different than being uninsured. To truly self-insure, you must have sufficient assets to be able to allocate a portion of those assets to a sinking fund. That fund needs to remain liquid because you don't know when you're going to need it. And to remain liquid, it means that we can't invest it in long-term growth investments such as stocks and bonds or real estate. These funds have to remain available until such time as they need it for care. An uninsured person will look at this and say, I have my money in an investment portfolio, and if need be, I can spend that money. But that does not equate to being self-insured. Now, sometimes we can plan by using the equity in your home, providing that there's in fact equity there that we can use for funding. However, to use home equity, you must plan ahead. Real estate is not a liquid asset, and it's not as if you can sell a room in your house to pay for care. Typically, a home equity conversion mortgage is set up in advance of needing care. Here, the value of your home remains available to you until you need to draw upon it. It's also possible to plan for your care by building it into your living arrangements. Today, many housing options are available that include support services. Relocation to a continuing care community will allow you to build the cost of care into your housing cost. Now, when it comes to insurance, I believe that you only purchase insurance for those costs that you cannot or do not want to incur on your own. So if we can't use one of these first three options, we now look at the insurance as a choice. And in the insurance world, there are now several different types of insurance products designed to meet your needs. Traditional long-term care insurance provides a daily or monthly benefit when you need assistance with 2 of the 6 activities of daily living. For those not familiar with activities of daily living, or ADLs as they're known, they are being able to bathe, dress, eat, transfer, move about, toileting, incontinence. Life insurance hybrid policies provide benefits based on a similar criteria to that traditional long-term care policy, but also pay a death benefit at the end of life. As a result, a person typically will receive every dollar back in the form of every dollar that they paid in premiums back in the form of either expenses paid for their care or in the form of tax-free death benefit. Finally, asset-based contracts allow you to transfer money into an interest-bearing account that will pay multiples of your original deposit if care is needed. The lack of a long-term care plan is the plan. A plan to expose your family to the 2 sets of consequences we spoke about earlier. It's a toll on your family's physical and emotional well-being and your ability to keep your financial commitments. The reason to plan is not the probability you will need care. It's because of the consequences suffered by those you love. I thank you for your attention today, and I'll now throw the floor open to any questions, Justin.
Thank you so much, David. What a great topic to be able to give and to think about. I mean, we deal with this with our clients. Just had the conversation this week with a client who was, just turning 60 and looking to prepare to have this conversation and create that plan. And they'd actually already taken the step to discuss it with their children, and children being able to say that yes, they'll help out during that time, but when the time comes, they are living their lives. Will they actually be able to do that, to step away from the careers? And is that what they would actually want? And just to have this plan and everybody to understand the plan and the entire family is of critical importance. So when something happens, because chances are it will, it's not an if, it's a when. If you live long enough, are they prepared? Have you had that discussion, and do you have the plan in place? It was just a very, very important topic to think about and discuss. I don't see any questions coming in either through the Q&A or the chat. So feel free to type those in if you have something that you want to discuss with David here.
Justin, while we're waiting, one thing that I'll add, I think a very common response that we hear from people is really a sense of denial. I'll hear people say, I'll never go into a nursing home. And the response that we always have is, well, if you're certain you're never going to go into a nursing home, share with us what you've done to make sure that doesn't happen. And as I've tried to stress, if that is the plan, just the denial of the inevitable, you're more likely to end up in a nursing home than the person who has actually put together the financing and the planning to make sure it doesn't happen.
Great. We do have now a couple questions coming in. Could you repeat the list of potential solutions in forming this long-term care plan and some additional comments about the decision-making process and how to select an appropriate option?
Okay, so here's the list of solutions and a comment about the decision-making to select an option. So if it were me, I would probably go through these in the order that they're listed. I actually didn't think of it when I put them down, but I would probably start that way. I'd say, is there a way that I can self-insure? Do I have enough assets that if I manage them appropriately, that I don't have to pay money to an insurance company to take that risk? Because recognize, whether it be car insurance, health insurance, or long-term care insurance, when I pay the insurance company, I'm paying them a fee to take on the risk. Now, the insurance company can do this because of what's called the law of large numbers. If they insure enough people, then on average, they're going to pay out exactly what their actuaries tell them they're going to pay out. It's amazing when we take a well documented and mature part of the insurance industry, like life insurance, how accurate these actuaries can be to tell how much money will be spent in a given year paying out life insurance claims. But to be able to do that on our own saves us the fee that would go to the cost, that the fee paid to the insurance company. So self-insurance would definitely be the first choice. But as I mentioned, gets really tricky because you have to have enough assets that you can put them aside, put a share of it aside to be ready to be used to pay for these types of care expenses. So typically to self-insure, we're talking about someone who has in the vicinity of $3, maybe $4 million or more, because we're going to need to put aside at least several $100,000 into a self-insurance program. Again, once the money goes into a self-insurance program, much like an insurance company, we can't invest that money in stocks and bonds and real estate because we need to have it available in case of a claim. If I can't use my self-insurance because I don't have that type of portfolio, the next thing I'd look to do is perhaps use the home equity. And now for a lot of people, that's an odd concept because we see a lot of clients, and the first thing they tell us is, I want to leave my house to my kids. Now, the ironic thing is, most of the time, the kids have no desire to have that house. Okay. The kids live in different states. They bought their own houses. What are they going to do with mom and dad's house? Well, they're probably going to turn around and sell it. So why not, as parents, take the equity and use that and leave the kids the stocks, the bonds, and the other things that you were going to use to pay for your care? But again, to do this, you have to pre-plan, because at the time that someone needs care, setting up the funding is not the way to go. And then, of course, relocating to a continuing care community, for most people, that's a decision that they don't make until they have more advanced age and they're looking to be preventative. If all three of those don't work, we do drop into the insurance categories. And if we look at the three as they're listed, one of the questions that I didn't address is from top to bottom, from traditional long-term care insurance through life insurance, hybrids to asset-based policies, the underwriting starts off in this list most strict in the traditional long-term care insurance and becomes less strict. So on an asset-based policy, typically, as long as the person's not on oxygen or using a walker or is bedridden, they can typically get an asset-based policy, where for traditional long-term care insurance, there's going to be a lot more involvement with doctor's records and medical background. Good question.
And another question came in: how do you start later in life?
Okay, how do you start later in life? So the way you start later in life is exactly the same way as I just explained. You go through this and go through this list. Now, one of the questions that I did not address is there's going to be a limit to the budget. So if we took and I'll take an extreme case, if an insurance company was really willing to write a traditional long-term care insurance policy on a 90-year-old, chances are the 90-year-old doesn't have enough money to pay the premium on that. For, I would guess that $100,000 of care would probably cost something like $90,000 in premium. But going in later in life, you still address these issues. Really, when you do a plan, you have to say, we want to avoid these consequences. What are we going to do about it so that we can avoid these consequences? Later in life, you're probably going to be looking at more along the lines of co-insuring these risks as opposed to fully insuring it. So if we're thinking, and I'm going to use an easy number here, that we want to make sure there's $10,000 a month available for care. If I'm talking to a 50-year-old who's planning for that, they might say insurance at 50 years old and in good health is really relatively inexpensive. I can buy $10,000 a month of coverage. If I'm talking to someone who's 70, perhaps what I'm thinking is, if I buy $5,000 a month of coverage, then I only have to self-insure for $5,000 a month.
Great. And then another thing I would add there as well is obviously with anything in planning, the earlier you start, the better. And the later you go, you may get ruled out of some of these options regardless. And so the later you do start, some of your options do start to dwindle and the harder it gets to plan. And so although we can't go back in time, that just means the best time to do it is now, to try to create this plan with the options you have available in front of you. And even if it's not perfect, it's better than having no plan where then all of your assets are going to be exposed to that long-term care event, and your family will suffer the consequences for that.
Justin, if I could just add on that, I think you make an excellent point. But I would just throw out the question: if you're later in life and you haven't come up with a plan yet, it's not going to get any easier next year or the year after. What I tried to stress in my comments today was get a plan together. Wherever you are in your life cycle, get a plan together, because right now, much like they say in the legal profession, if you don't have a will, you do have a will, because your will is whatever state law says happens to your assets at the time of your death if you don't draft a law, like don't draft a will. Well, if you don't have a long-term care plan and tomorrow you find out you need care, your plan is your plan. And at that point, you're going to say, well, how much do we have in the bank? And you're going to have to figure out how we're going to make do based upon what we have. So regardless of where you are in your life, it's never too early to sit down and say, what are we going to do when the time does come? Because whether it's going to be for yourself, for your spouse, for a sibling, these things are going to come up. And, in the old days, I like to tell the story when we talk about Social Security. Do you know why Social Security was originally set up? The retirement age was age 65. And the answer is, the reason age 65 was chosen for the original retirement age in Social Security is because at that time it was life expectancy. The government didn't expect to pay money in retirement on average because people only lived to age 65. Now that people are living longer, it is, in my opinion, just foolish not to address these issues.
Great. We've got one more question. And if you have more questions, I don't know if you want to, maybe don't advance yet, because I think the question pertains to this slide, but then we'll put our contact information up on the slide, so you can reach out to us with any further questions or more personalized questions. But somebody asked, can you tell us more about the last option you mentioned? And I'm assuming it's the last option on this slide here. If it's not, feel free to type in and correct me. But the last option, asset-based policies with a long-term care rider. People may not be familiar with that.
Yeah, and that's a great question, and probably it is the newest of the options on the slide. Asset-based policies are contracts that are typically written on an annuity chassis, a fixed annuity chassis, meaning that if you put in a chunk of money, and for the sake of a number, I'm going to say $100,000. If you put in $100,000, the annuity company says we guarantee an interest rate. Now, the interest rates on these are not very high, because number one, it's a guaranteed payment. So it's much like putting your money in a CD or in the bank. But you do get a guaranteed rate of return. Again, for ease, I'm going to say 1%. You get 1%. The insurance company will say to you, if you put in $100,000 and you need care, you will first spend your $100,000. But when you've exhausted that $100,000, we will give you an additional $100,000 or perhaps $200,000 that you can spend towards your care, giving you a total of $200,000 or $300,000 pool of money that's available for your care. The cost of doing this program, because you still have your $100,000 that is always available to you, the cost of doing this program is the lost interest in the fact that you're getting 1%, as opposed to if you managed your money on your own and you invested it, you might get better than 1%. Now, again, if you take a look at 2022, where the investment markets are typically down, this is a good example of why you have to, if you're managing assets for long-term care, you can't invest in stocks or bonds or real estate, because now we're in a down period of time. And in the beginning of the year, if you had $100,000 and you invested in the S&P 500, right now you have $87,000. But the bill for the long-term care is still going to come in, and it doesn't care about the fact that the markets are down. So an asset-based policy guarantees that you can't lose money. It guarantees that you're going to, in fact, make interest on your money. And it provides for the fact that if you need care, it's going to pay you not what you deposited, but what you deposited times times 2 or 3 times that amount? Good question, Justin.
Perfect. All right, yeah, so if you want to forward up to contact information, if you have that available, and I'm going to tease a couple of our next webinars that we have lined up, always being the first Wednesday of each month. So next month, we have Sean Callaghy, owner and operator of Callaghy Law, a 150-person law firm located here in New Jersey. And he's going to be talking about the power of influence. We all have influential people in our lives that we've looked up to, whether it be athletes like Muhammad Ali, social justice movement, Martin Luther King, great scientist Albert Einstein. Those are all influential people. And how did they become to have such great influence? So Sean Callaghy has really done a lot of research into unpacking this, and will really give an interesting presentation next month on the webinar series. In August, we've got a best-selling author, and actually we're going international. She's coming from the UK into the Zoom screen, Julia Samuel, talking about grief and how grief works. And then September, our series will bring in Larry Swedrow and Sam Adams to talk about ESG investing, as that's becoming a ever hot topic, looking at environmental, social, and governance screens when you're dealing with investments, and how to best look at that. So really great speakers of lineups. Feel free to reach out to us, go to our website, and we'll be here to answer questions. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar series.